What's up, painting friends? It's Stoof here. Welcome back to my channel. This week we are going to continue working on the acrylic painting of Grand Canyon that we started last week. Real quick, here is the finished painting compared to where we finished the painting last week at the end of part 1. So part 1 to part 2, there's what it looks like. Basically, I redo this entire painting with another coat of paint, a few more layers, and 3 more sessions. Where the painting left off at the end of part 1 of this video was a little bit too light in value. The variation in the colors was a little too dramatic, and there was still some white of the canvas visible under the paint. So I went back over the whole painting, starting with the sky, making the sky a little bit more purple violet at the top, and then blending that down into that bluer color. And then once the sky was touched up, I started working on the rock canyon walls again, layering over each individual section of rock, starting with the rocks farthest in the background and being cautious while blending my colors here. Trying to keep in mind that I don't want to have too much contrast. Because of the time of day, we don't get crazy saturation in the colors. We don't get a lot of contrast, so I'm trying to help this to read accurately by blending colors and values that aren't too extreme for this one. After getting that left side done, I started working more on the canyon crevice where we lose sight of the rock and it just goes straight down. And I did increase the contrast here. I made a super dark value for that line where we have the canyon, and I wanted that to kind of be a focal point and help draw the viewer's eye from that lower left section where it's super dark, and then kind of follow that zigzag pattern back deeper into the canyon, and then your eyes come up and see the rest of the rocks. So by increasing contrast in a specific part of your painting, you can draw more attention to that area. And then because I have that diagonal line leading from that section, it draws your attention to the other parts of the painting. After working on the far left side of the painting, I continued boosting the contrast of the canyon crevice area just behind the foreground. And then I started adding some of the colors to the foreground. Because I'm using acrylic paint, blending the right colors was a big challenge in this painting. If I were using oil paint, I could have made a bunch of that color, put it on my palette, and it would have stayed wet for hours, but because I'm using acrylic paint, the paint would dry fairly quickly, so I had to re-blend colors and rematch to the original colors I had. And I had to think about blending values from like warm to cool, light to dark, while everything was still wet, rather than working on one bright section, letting that dry, and then coming back. I had to work on both at the same time to get a bit of a transition and a softer blend in spaces where there is a softer blend in the reference photo. I started to add little hints of cooler reds just to warm up that crevice area a little bit behind the foreground on the right side of the canvas. Then started blending those down a little to mute them down. I didn't want anything too drastic there. I also started building up the brightness and the warmth of the highlights on the rock on the right side of the canvas, starting to pay attention to the rock bedding layers on the left side and making sure in general those match with the right side, because the way the Grand Canyon's laid out, it's all really flat rock beds, and then the river just carved right down. So the left and right side of the canyon should match up geologically, so I was trying to make sure that matched up as well. And at this point, I'm just using a small round tip brush, going back and forth in different areas, adding more detail in some spots, trying to make the values accurate in other spots, boosting shadows, and then when I made a shadow too dark, I would go back and add a little bit of a highlight there, and just continuing to work over these areas again and again until the left and right sides made sense. And then the foreground is a little bit warmer than the rest of the background, even though the rock units themselves aren't super warm. The general colors are a little warmer in this section because it's closest to the viewer, and there's a little bit more light hitting these two rocks as well. So keeping those same flat rock bedding units, adding some horizontal and vertical brush strokes to create the rock bedding look, adding a couple more little shadows in places where there might be some little crevices in the rock, and just continuing to go back and forth over little sections until I felt like the detail is balanced enough and makes enough sense where you're not distracted by any particular part of the landscape, and it all just reads accurately. And that basically wraps up part 2 of this tutorial. I hope this was helpful to you. I didn't put this in real time because I spent another few hours working on this painting, and I didn't narrate the entire time because parts of it got repetitive. So hopefully you found this helpful. And if you have any recommendations for future painting tutorials, leave a comment under this video. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and happy painting. Bye-bye!